Hello and welcome to this youth justice session. Want to apologise for the fact that my screen is frozen, so you won't see me as a very dynamic speaker here, but I'm Kim Turner and I'm chairing this session. And I'm only here for 45 seconds to introduce everyone. So just a bit of housekeeping. I'm sure that most of you have been to slide sessions already today, but in terms of posting questions, in the last session I went to, there were a number of questions put in the chat space. If you want your question to be answered, please put them in the Q&A section rather than in the general chat. Use the chat to interact, but if you want a question answering, please put it in the Q&A. So we have 3 speakers this afternoon. First up, we have Elaine from Calderdale Youth Justice Service. Then we have Fiona from Queen's University Belfast, and then finishing with Maria, who is going to talk about the Youth Justice Language Cost Action Project, which is a bit of a mouthful. And then we'll have 8 minutes for questions at the end. So I'm going to hand over quickly now to Elaine, who is already got her slides ready to go. So over to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you to everybody for sticking with this afternoon. To steal a quote from Chris Mason, for any BBC newscast viewers, you ooze stamina. For sticking with it to this time in the evening. So moving quickly on, my plan is to speak to you this afternoon about self-advocacy within the communication assessment pathway with young people within the youth justice setting. So just to say that the service I work for is Calderdale Youth Justice Service, which sits within Calderdale Council and covers a large rural area between Leeds and Manchester, and has quite a small population for the size of the area that it is. An aging population, quite a diverse population, and certainly a rich industrial history, although unfortunately that hasn't continued. And the Youth Justice Service, you'll see some of them here in the photographs. This was at one of the communication training days that I did with them last year. So they have been used to having a speech and language therapist within the team. There's been SLT involvement since 2020 with a previous speech and language therapist who left in spring 2022. But as we're all aware, that was a really interesting time worldwide in terms of service provision. And obviously the SLT provision that was offered at that point was severely impacted by the global pandemic. The service was empty, or there was no service provided from spring until I joined then in November 2022 into a multidisciplinary team that had approximately 17 case managers and case workers, had a core health team of a CAMS nurse, or CAMS worker, as she likes to be called, a physical health nurse, and then a speech and language therapist. We also had probation officers on secondment from the Adult Probation Service, and we also have a designated police officer as part of our team, with access to a range of other services for young people, including services like branching out that look at drug use within the young people that we work with. So I was very keen to understand the culture of the service at that point when I joined, particularly given that my own thinking about the provision that I would offer was very much shaped by Arnstein's Ladder of Participation, which was one of the seminal papers that I wrote my own PhD on, that looked at service user involvement within early years services in Northern Ireland, but also to understand what had been previously offered by speech and language therapy, to understand what the staff expectations of that would be. And it became very clear very quickly that actually anything I wanted to do was going to be built on the relationships that I had with those case managers in order to access the young people coming into the service and provide any type of SLT intervention with them, bearing in mind that coming to see the speech and language therapist was not a mandatory requirement of their order. So starting to kind of gather information around all those things. And the previous SLT offer had very much looked at assessment and information sharing, gathering case history, undertaking an assessment, formal and informal approach to that, and then writing a report with a plan to share that with court panel meetings, education providers, given that the focus with our young people is very much around getting them back into or maintaining them in an education setting and working towards employment for them. So taking a plan, do, study, act approach, you'll all be familiar with this. It's already been mentioned in some of the presentations that you've possibly come across already this morning. I really wanted to meet with the young people and understand what their wants and needs of the service would be. And I've included in this graph some artwork from one of our young people. This is Joe's work, who I met whilst he was on an order with us. Joe was in an alternative education provider and had a range of diagnoses and really struggled to engage with education in any format. So we were really keen to see whether or not review of his speech and language and communication would support him in that context. So he's just one example of the range of young people that I work with who have a range of need from SEMH, ASD, ADHD. But it was really around trying to identify what would be of most use to these children and young people, recognizing that less than 5% would have had previous involvement with core speech and language therapy services. That's not to say that they weren't referred to speech and language therapy service, but for various reasons, possibly were not brought and therefore were discharged from service. But also, just to steal a quote from one of the presentations this morning, any work that I was trying to do with them really did move at the speed of trust. So it became very clear very quickly that it was about recognizing where the young people were at, and also that they had seen multiple professionals possibly, and that their own perception of themselves was, as Joe described, he went to the naughty school. And these are just some quotes from another young person that I worked with, Malachi, who was 12 when I worked with him, and he described school as really hard. I don't know anything. I get an answer sheet with 4 questions. I only know one answer. In mainstream, it's hard because I don't understand and then end up in ISO. And that was a frequent story that I was hearing with our young people. English for him, that he described himself as not being good at all them words get blurry, I don't understand it. With regard to maths, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do in most lessons. So the education setting he was in had an alternative provision within the mainstream school, and he was basically ping-ponging in and out of these 2 settings. And his description of the impact on him of that was that there was a lot to catch up on, and he didn't catch up, but also that the teacher didn't know what to do. So at the same time, there was an increasing kind of chatter around self-advocacy, particularly within the setting that I work in, with Van Roosten defining it as an individual's ability to effectively communicate, to assert their interests, desires, needs, and rights, but that it also assumed the ability to make informed decisions. And also that students who have positive self-perceptions and perceived control over their learning ability are more willing and motivated to work successfully with adults in their environment. So both those things struck me as really, really relevant, given that there was a clear pattern of the young people that I was working with not having positive self-perceptions. And there was also a query around how informed their decisions were around coming to see me when they did come. So what was becoming increasingly apparent in the first year that I was enrolled was that we were getting assessments started, but we weren't finishing them. So the first thing that I did was to try and support understanding, to explain the assessment, what it was about. That was given, I'll show you it in 1 wee second, but it was given to case managers to introduce the offer of an SLT assessment, and then I would use it again at the point of meeting the young person face to face. Really key to that was the inclusion of my photograph, which I wasn't overly keen to do, but it was really important for them that they had a face to put to the name, because they've seen so many faces for some of them, and they've effectively put so many professionals through their hands. So the inclusion of my photograph was very important in this infographic that the case managers use to explain, and that I then will repeat when I meet with them, just outlining the process itself. So that was the first thing that we did. Interestingly, it was less about my face and more about my accent as the young people started to get to know me. So that was the first point of introducing some form of self-advocacy. Then there was the learning interview that I would use at the point that I got to meet with them. I would have populated with some relevant case history information, but also the points of discussion in the meeting with them would be around a bit about school, but more so just about things that they're interested in and what they enjoy, trying to encourage them to express what they feel they're good at, which was really very interesting. And you know, some of them really did need a lot of support to identify those things. So then, as I said, by the end of the first year, it was clear that we were getting assessments completed, we were getting referrals through, but there was a sizable proportion that still weren't completed. Part of that was around ensuring that case managers understood the purpose and value of the assessment, particularly to the young people. Another challenge that I encountered was that young people struggled with the school type nature of any assessment. I've had some get really, really cross because they felt it was for younger kids. So making things age appropriate was another thing that we needed to think about. And also what control did they have within that assessment dynamic. One of the things that I introduced was that at the point of completing the assessment and drafting a report, that I would offer them the opportunity to come back and we'd jointly review the report between us, and we'd work out between us what was the best way for them to understand the information contained in the report, and then that I would amend based on feedback. And one of the things that I would do is include the commentary that they use to describe themselves in the report, which often gets at least a smile. And also then, as an output from the assessment process, we would develop a communication profile, as you can see here. This is just one example of a young person that I did last week. Now, we changed the color. He had asked that the graphics, I have board maker graphics on some of them, that those be removed. But very much so that he had control. These would then be printed off, laminated, and posted to the young person for them to share with who they decided. But again, so that they were aware of having power to control that, as well as their agreement to have it shared with the education setting. So then the next thing that we introduced was a pre-referral communication screening to be completed by the case manager to understand the communication from the young person's perspective. This is not to be confused by the part of the Asset Plus that staff complete that gathers their perceptions of communication need. And at that point, once I got that screening tool back and was able to review it, I could then decide how appropriate or to accept or decline the referral as appropriate. The screening tool utilizes graphics to support the young person to answer the range of communication questions about their communication. And it's also, again, I would print it off and use it at the point of where I meet them face to face, again, to engage them and show them, reflect back on work that they have already completed as part of that process. So the current service provision model looks like this, with 4 points of self-advocacy within it that I have just outlined to yourselves. It's not to say that it hasn't been without its challenges, but what we have managed to do is increase the number of completed assessments from 58 to 66, and I'm about to do the stats for this year shortly. The purpose of that means we can provide a completed and substantial report for court, for solicitors, for education settings, for the police, and for other services that the young person may be involved with. They also have a choice about whether or not to complete a communication profile and the choice about who they share that with. And taking into account the young person within the decision-making process, we have garnered some feedback, including that the assessment was easier than I thought it was. But challenges remain around supporting case managers to understand how to, as well as the value of doing the pre-assessment screening tool, and administering it effectively. It's designed to be used visually, and so maybe doing it over the phone isn't the best way. Those kinds of things have cropped up, but we're ironing those out and we're getting there. And also to, on a wider scale, offer training to on an ongoing basis to youth justice staff, but also to the police, to education settings, particularly secondary school settings, to support them to understand that is the behaviour in some way an indication of communication need rather than just a behavioural issue, as we know it frequently gets designated as. So this is all very much still a work in progress, and thank you very much for your attention. I think, Kim, I may have caught us up a bit on time.
Thank you. I really love the moving at the speed of trust, and I think the fact that you moved at the speed of trust and still managed to complete 2/3 of assessments within time is a great effort. So now I want to hand over to Fiona.
So hello everybody, hope you can see my slides okay. So I'll be talking to you today about my research, which is all about using AI avatars to develop a dynamic training program for police when working with adults with speech, language and communication needs. So just a little bit about my background. I qualified as an SLT in 2011, and then I worked in New Zealand until 2019 within the Ministry of Education. So in this team, I worked in the learning support team, and I specialised with severe behaviour team, as well as being an advisor on deaf children. And that included a community project with the police and social work departments, which was really interesting to do. I came back to Northern Ireland and worked with the Stroke Association for 1 year. And then I finally moved over to the NHS, and I had 2 part-time posts with the hearing impairment team and with children in residential care. And I've worked as a registered intermediary for the last 3 years. So at the moment, I'm now completing a PhD with the Linus Doctoral Training Programme. So this is a scholarship. It's very interdisciplinary. We've got like people doing astrophysics and things like that. But the common thread is that everyone must be studying how AI applies to their field. So it's such a big privilege to be studying speech and language therapy in the context of the latest technology. I think that speech and language training within the criminal justice system is often quite overlooked. So it's actually quite incredible to be seeing how speech and language training can be delivered in a very innovative way with cutting edge technology that doesn't normally come up for speech and language therapists. So I see it as a huge privilege. So these are things you already know, but these are the core speech and language principles underpinning my research. I think the middle one there, the fact that SLCN is often masked, means that it's very easily missed in interactions with the police. So one big thing I'm focusing on in my research is the ability to recognize potential speech and language and communication needs as a core component of interview training for them. And also just about the fact that SLCN is overrepresented in the criminal justice system. I think that just shows that need for the training. And the more sort of innovative and interactive and dynamic it is, I think the more they will engage with it. Often speech and language training is seen as quite common sense and is often delivered in-house. Okay, so here's a question for you. Are any of these not AI, or which ones are AI? So AI is used increasingly in things like job interviews, training videos, and it is also used in police interviews. Initially, there's been a really big focus on the area of child sexual abuse, and increasingly focus on adult victims, and there's starting to be some focus on suspects as well. So a lot of the current sort of AI training that exists is all about using more open-ended questions. And there's some research that's been done about teaching police how to deliver evidence. And so in that kind of virtual AI setting. So with the suspects, which is what I'm focusing on, it's not very well researched as of yet. And also, I suppose it's about that sort of looking specifically at the underlying speech and language needs. And the answer to that slide is that all of them are AI generated images of AI within policing. So it is used more and more. So I mentioned about the AI avatars already being used with child sexual abuse. So just to break down what that actually involves. So it's a simulated interview. So the police trainee will conduct an interview with an AI-powered avatar that mimics the responses of a child victim. So this allows them to practice questioning techniques and observe how the different questions elicit different responses. So it'll be things like the child will know their story, but they only respond to questions that are asked well. And the more suggestive questions become, the more they will either just agree or they'll give false information. And at the end, the police won't have gotten the correct story from the child. So the second thing is about question classification. So the software is sort of trained to be able to analyze the questions that are asked by the trainee. And so far, often what's happened is that it's been able to classify them into recommended and not recommended questions. So dynamic responses, the AI models are trained to generate responses that are dynamic and contextually relevant. So, it reacts in real time, responds to the question that's been asked, and is, hopefully as realistic as possible. Instant feedback. So the system is able to provide feedback on the interviewer's questions right away. So trainees can learn how to ask more effective questions and to start to use more open questions and avoid suggestive questioning. Then modeling and training. So these recommended questions can be modeled and that training can be incorporated. And finally, it's very realistic. So this is maybe one of the ways that can provide a very realistic experience for the police. Sometimes actors are used, but that can be quite cost heavy. And the actor needs to be, well trained. It has to be in one location. And then also, I suppose, an actor simulating vulnerability can be quite difficult, and especially when it comes to working with children. So this is a way to go beyond a lecture or PowerPoint-based training in a more sort of innovative way. So these are some of the initial findings. So it's been able to be delivered remotely with computers or smartphones, and it has evidenced changes in interviewer behavior, which has transferred to interviews with actual children in a mock victim interview and in actual police field interviews. So the initial findings are really good. A lot of this research is very recent and there's more being released all the time. So multiple benefits have been evidenced. The AI avatars can be standardized, controlled, and the same scenario can be repeated over and over. It can be done in more diverse locations and overall provide a realistic, scalable, and cost-effective training solution. And studies are showing that when it's paired with feedback and modeling, that it is improving interview quality. So this comes to my research, and I'm focusing on two particular gaps. The first one is that all avatar training so far has focused on teaching interviewers to use more open and closed questions, and sort of some of those like core interview techniques that are really important, but it could be developed further to target those communication skills, and particularly to interview people with speech, language, and communication needs. So that training doesn't really exist in general. It's not sort of standardized and always rolled out. There are things that are, are opt-in or have been trialed, but it's not something that's consistent across all of policing. Secondly, I'll be honing in on the research gap around suspect interviews. So there is a lot more research at the moment for victims, and particularly around children. So yeah, it's just that kind of research gap that I've decided to focus on as a start. So these are the main things that I will be looking at. So I suppose it's saying like, what's the capability of large language models? What can it do? There's some things I'd love to do, but are too tricky. But at the moment, the things that are easy to train the LLM on and to measure are ICWs. So how many keywords are in a question. Vocab frequency is looking at how often one word is used per 1,000 words. And then you can actually have a sort of cutoff of, words that are sort of recommended, or vocab that becomes too infrequent and low frequency and therefore not recommended. About negation, so something like, why didn't you go there? Or double negatives as well. That is tricky in interview settings because the suspect will have to sort of hold it in their mind and flip it around to actually understand what's actually being asked. And then also including the open and closed questions, and including tag questions, which is saying something like, you were there, weren't you? With a tag on the end, which again is very difficult for suspects with speech and language needs. They'll often acquiesce or agree with that. More difficult things to measure, which I would love to include, but I think will have to be something as a future direction, is things like pausing. So ensuring that the police pause for enough time after they've asked their question to give that processing time, and don't just jump in with another question or interrupt. Looking at their tone and their body language, and also incorporating blanks levels and how abstract the question is. At the moment, those are more difficult for the technology to sort of analyze and rate. So I'll be focusing on the first 4 in that list. I suppose it's just a question of not being able to do everything and the limitations of technology at the moment. I'm also looking at agentic loops. So this is about asking the AI to play an agent. So in other words, you're giving it a role. So I've been testing the agentic loops where AI plays a suspect, and it also has a second role where it plays a trainer. So it gives feedback about the question and suggests how the question could be simplified. And then the final element is the human trainee. So there's a human in that loop as well. And so they're interacting with the other two. So at the moment, I'm testing how large language models cope with being given those roles. And one of the challenges is that it tends to overperform. So as a suspect, it actually answers the whole question and does really well. And so I'm trying to figure out what prompts and sort of decision trees and what training it needs to answer something like, oh, I don't know, or only answer the question partially. So that is a current challenge, but I think I'm starting to figure that one out, which is good. The design of the study will be a baseline interview, which will be 5 minutes. And then there'll be some training with the feedback sort of toggled on, where the police will get feedback about their questions and suggestions for improvements, or like different words they could use, or how they could shorten a question. And that will be about 10 minutes. And then there'll be a final score taken. So another interview repeated with no training, and to see whether they're sort of, whether the different parameters have improved with that training. A lot of it will just be getting the police perspectives on it. What did they think about it? What were the strengths and difficulties? you know, do they see potential and what would they change? So getting all of that really rich information as well. I have some current research decisions that I'm making, and one of them is about the use of mal deception. So potentially not telling the police that it's about speech and language, but just that it's interview training, to get the best, most realistic baseline for them. The second one is just about that identification of speech and language needs. I'm very aware of the need to avoid stereotypes. So some of my early consultations with people from computer science led to lots of comments, such as the difficulty that they would see in programming a person to present with having speech difficulties, or someone actually said how to move like a person with learning needs, which wasn't really the direction we're going in at all. And so I'm so keen to not reinforce stereotypes. So as I already said, like one of the main issues is that people see individuals with, well, the police have kind of seen individuals with speech and language needs to be a bit of a homogenous group. So it's promoting the idea of heterogeneity. And one of the core themes is the invisible nature. So they need to identify. And people with hidden speech and language needs is the main group the police will encounter. So I'm really focusing on that. And then earlier I shared the components that I'm measuring. So things like information carrying words, vocab, question type, and negation. So just thinking about how to sort of teach that as well. So considering things like games within the AI program. So, you know, reducing number of keywords in a sentence, or how to simplify a word, you know, so find a more everyday word for this word, and sort of how to have that teaching element as well. Yeah, so also just about the sort of feedback. So one of the key research questions is the best way to deliver that feedback. And would that be after every question or every few questions, and how would that be delivered? So just a lot of sort of research decisions that I'm looking into right now. And that is me. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
I think we're going to hold the questions till the end. So we are back on track with time. Thank you so much, Fiona. It's a bit of a stereotype that speech and language therapists aren't very good with technology. So it's great to see a project at the cutting edge of technology instead. So now I'm going to hand over to Maria for the final session. So hopefully those slides are working now. Fabulous.
Mute, and can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Do I need to move this maybe so that you see me better? You see the slides better? Okay, perfect. Lovely. So, wow. Let's see. Right. I feel incredibly fortunate to have been able to share this panel with Elaine and Fiona. Thank you very much, Kim, for having invited me to present in this panel. And it makes a lot of sense that I come at the end, because I will be able to skip a lot of slides, because there's a lot of shared knowledge already. So, hello, my name is Maria Arce. I am a professor of linguistics at the University of Greenwich. And what I am doing here now is to present our so-called COST action, which is a European funded network project. COST, the COST acronym stands for Cooperation in Science and Technology, and cooperation is key in the way we have built and we are meant to build our network and the topic that we choose to play the role of the skeleton for the network. The name of the network is, as Kim said, is very long. It's Justice to Youth Language Needs, Human Rights Undermined by an Invisible Disadvantage. We've covered the invisible disadvantage already. And what we focus on in the action is addressing these invisible language factors throughout criminal justice procedures. And I hope I'm able to show exactly what are the main aims of the action. So before I get into this specific network project, which has been running already for 2 years, and we have 2 more years to go, I'd like to spend a little bit of time and say a few words about the big umbrella project, because I've also heard insights about this from Elaine before that resonate with our angle. And also the Royal College of Speech Language Therapists in the UK has been a big supporter of this umbrella project that is called, we call it ATLAS. ATLAS is the acronym, and the acronym that we came up with several years ago stands for Accessible Tool for Language Assessment at Schools, which is at the very end, is the very end goal that we have, because we understand that if we are talking about language issues in justice, in population affected by having been in contact with the law, is because maybe not enough has been done at the schools in all the prior and the previous steps. So our umbrella project, as I call it, is about raising awareness of language ability, as a gateway to engage with the world in general, engage with education, and of course in this particular network, as the key ability we need to engage with the justice proceeding. So the cost action is about overseeing language factors in criminal justice and spreading awareness and knowledge across the relevant sectors. So it is about raising awareness and improving knowledge from within. So we are spending a lot of energy disseminating the knowledge that we share here, I mean, definitely here in this conference among all you professionals, speech language therapists, and spread it across all the other stakeholders and sectors that are far from having an understanding about how key language is. In the Atlas project, in the manifesto that we issued, we make very explicit the fact that language is the main means to make ourselves understood and to understand and be able to make something of situations, and then again to access everything around us. The team was called Think Language First, the initiative, and the reason why I have here all my colleagues is because the aim from the beginning was to raise awareness internationally. So the main drivers are the UK and the Netherlands in particular, and then also Spain and Germany. All of us in this slide are linguists, which is important for another reason, because linguists, like as the discipline and the sector and the group of professionals who are trained to have a very deep and detailed understanding about language, are not very commonly involved and engaged with raising awareness about how important language is, and also, which is also important for our network, how the knowledge that we have in linguistics is important to affect details in assessment, so that we also improve the sensitivity of assessments. Of course, from the very beginning, we haven't been working on our own, and we've been working very closely from day one with Karen Bryan, with Derek Mann, known to you all, more colleagues from my university like Erica. Jean Gross was with us at the very beginning as well, as someone bringing us the overarching and the general overview about disadvantaged children and special education needs. But you all know that Jean has a she's very aware about how important language is to develop education, and Baker for sign languages as well, because we wanted to cover also in this umbrella project all sorts of needs and difficulties. And Ellen Herritz from the Netherlands as well, speech and language therapist, also specialized in DLD and deaf children. Our point of departure, I don't need to explain it. I don't need to spend much time. But what we said and what we always say when we go to different stakeholders is that children with language difficulties are disproportionately represented in the youth justice system, and that they are identified way too late. And I think it's been Elaine before who said also earlier that only 5% of children had been aware of, had any prior contact with a speech and language therapist. And this is something that we keep finding. And the angle we took in the project was that if this is the case, this is also a breach of human rights, because if these children, these people were not identified with a language difficulty while they were going through the process through criminal justice procedures, then how are we sure that they were understanding and they were answering correctly, right? So this aim of raising awareness started in what I've said before in the Atlas Leiden manifesto that we launched in 2024. And the fact that we gathered already very early on, as as summarized here, is that we wanted to build a tool that we could use to mobilize and to show across sectors and across stakeholders. So the fact that, rounding up, there is a very big percentage of the world population affected by language difficulties. And this is a very big percentage. And I usually present it when I speak with two people who are not in the sector like you all are. I present it next to figures for diabetes or obesity, which are about 13% of the world population affected. And this helps people realize how much of a world problem, of a global health issue, language difficulties is. However, the contrast in awareness about it is striking. Because everybody would have heard about how important obesity is, diabetes, why it's important to address and to devote resources to address diabetes, to reduce the impact, etc. But when you come to speech and language needs, the general awareness is incredibly low. When we speak about deaf children in particular, we, with several stakeholders, we've made them aware that how important it is to bring sign language from the very beginning, because the vast majority of children, deaf children, are born to hearing parents. So awareness about this, about how to support the language ability from the very beginning, the importance of having very present how we need to really be looking at how other factors related or associated to different socioeconomic characteristics have to be taken into account, and how other factors can affect how we understand the language profile of children and young people, or people in general. And we mentioned multilingualism as one, not because we think that that is a negative condition in itself, the opposite. I mean, I hope it's not, for my own sake and my children, but it is because of how difficult it becomes to identify any other language need when it combines with the speaker having more than one language, right? So I know this must be known to all of you here. We are familiar with the very high figures and all the behavioral problems. That is what people see, is what teachers and others notice and see, but it's not what, but it may be masking, it may be a blocking to look at what is at the bottom, right, at the end. So in essence, in that manifesto, we are calling for the ideal scenario where all types of language needs are recognized and understood. And this is a very easy bullet point, but there is a lot of work involved here because we need to understand better every different profile of language, and we need to spread the word. We need tools that are not going to be mistaken conditions for the diagnosis and identification in general, to have adequate language support, access to it, and that includes the the justice system, as we've been speaking today also in the session before this one, and that people are more aware about all the barriers that we find in language. So this manifesto, I mention it here because the Royal College has been pivotal for us to bring this agenda forward. We had the first, its launch at the House of Lords in 2024 at the end of Jan. Then we had a two-day conference at the British Academy to anchor the celebration of the first anniversary. And we had many colleagues from the Royal College attending and speaking and chairing some sessions, and also members from, and we also had speakers who were speech language therapists that worked in prisons as well, and in the health system. We presented it in the University Hospital of Bergen as well to get endorsement for their the equivalent of what you are is the equivalent to the Royal College of SLTs, because they wanted to endorse it because they thought that they needed it to raise awareness across policymakers at many levels, to raise the level of support for children and adults as well. And then we presented it at DLD Day at the EU Parliament, and the hosts of the host of that event was ESLA, the European Speech and Language Association. So all this is about bringing language to the surface, to the desk of different stakeholders, different listeners that did not have language as an ability in the radar. And in particular, when we speak about justice, what we are doing with this cost action is to raise awareness across all the sectors. So if I show you how, so this is the official, again, the official slide. I mean, what you would see if you went online to see the official site, and what I am very, very happy to share, and what we are enjoying a lot from this huge group, is that, as you see here, it is multidisciplinary, it is multinational, and it is multisectoral. So the linguists are very much represented. And as I said, because there is a conversation that is very much needed between or among all the disciplines and sectors that have to do with language, because we are identifying that there is a lot of knowledge that sometimes stays within the silos of the discipline, and we need to bring the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. And we wanted to create a space for everybody involved with language and be together.
Maria,
so,
I'm really sorry to cut you off here, but we literally have 2 minutes until the end
you
of
know what?
this
I don't see.
session.
Thank you, because I don't see your. I could see others, but I couldn't see you. So thank you. Okay, so don't worry. I'm gonna. This is enough, because what I wanted to share in particular is that we are working with criminologists, with health professionals, with youth justice services, with people with lived experience, in particular people who have been through the criminal justice system for a long time, and now they've become mentors, with education services, judges, lawyers, and the police. This is a table that summarizes how many members we have. It's more than 200 now. 30 countries. And what is important for us to note here is that we are sharing a lot of ways of going about things. I mean, examples of good practice and examples of what needs to change and where others can bring ideas. In this sense, the UK is really leading the conversation of best practices, I have to say. This is the summary of all the things we've done. I'd like to highlight the emphasis we are putting into the link with education and language abilities before entering the in prison, during prison. So the Bergen meeting also in February was a lot about what happens in education in prison, how interesting it is that the language factor is missed there. And this also shows how multidisciplinary we are working. And to finish, what we are doing, so the deliverables that you will see as a product of our project is a map about how much we know about language in the state of development of adolescence, which is this age of youth justice. So what happens after these in these ages that are much less studied? What are the points in the pathway of contact with justice where language assessment must occur, or we have to make sure that it has happened? And what are the key structures? And this is where Fiona's presentation resonated a lot with what we are doing. What are the key language structures that appear in interviewing, and how can we, and we are mapping with evidence how important it is that certain structures put together with what we know about language needs are left out. And to do an inventory of the existing tools that we have, and for the justice systems across countries, right? And then we are developing training materials. I'm going to highlight this for practitioners and professionals in youth justice in general. So thank you very much. That was me. And please, everybody who is interested, email me or join us using the QR code. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And that is the end of day one at the RCSLT conference. I'm afraid we've run over time in our presentations, so we don't have time for the Q&A. However, thank you very much for your questions that you've put on the Q&A. Elaine, Fiona, Maria, if you could look at some of those questions and reply to some of those, that'd be great. But it's wonderful to see so much work going on in this space, and the fact that there's been 2 sessions at the end of day one around the criminal justice system just proves how much things have come on, and the fact that there's huge investment with this EU cost action project, how much people are taking account of speech, language and communication, speech and language therapists. And I think that's a real change in the last 20 years. So thank you, presenters, for your time, and thank you all. Have a lovely evening.